Wherever Mom was going, I was going, and we were going fast. So yeah, she was a lot of fun.
Stephanie Belenka still has vivid memories of her mother, Brenda Martinez.
She liked music. We used to listen to a lot of the radio back then. She was a great host. Like I said, she hosted the family, she hosted her friends.
And December of 1988 had all the makings of what would be another memory-filled holiday season. Brenda went to use a payphone at the corner of Fenton and West Atherton Roads in Flint on the 22nd, but she never returned home. Stephanie was just 6 years old.
There was a moment that you just remember suddenly not feeling safe.
That's your comfort, that's your person. She was all I had. And then she was gone. And nobody could explain why.
Brenda's body wouldn't be found until several days after the new year at this park outside of Flint. Her death would be ruled a homicide.
I think there was a long time, even after the funeral and everything, you just kind of have this magical thinking, like, one day she's just gonna walk in the door, you know, it was a bad dream, or it was a mistake, or somebody was confused. Maybe she just got lost, she's gonna come back. So that was definitely hard as a kid, trying to come to terms with something, such a big loss when you're so little.
Stephanie was sent to live with relatives in northern Michigan, all the time wondering what happened to her mom and why.
We've tried getting answers for years, and it's just, you just want that back. You want to be safe. You want to feel home. And so that's something that you just do your best to have for your own children, because there's a part of you that will never understand how that happened.
It's the same question police have tried to answer for decades, but the case has largely remained cold, with few details made public.
This is somebody that's very important, maybe not to you, but to her family and her friends. She was kind of like the glue. She held us all together. And she enjoyed that. She enjoyed us being together. So we definitely want to try to find out what happened and bring some closure for her legacy and for my children and for myself and, the friends and family that are still wondering what happened and why.
For now, Stephanie and her family will continue to wait as they keep sharing her mother's story, hoping to one day bring the case to a close.
Why isn't always the most important part, but being able to have your day in court, I guess, and look at that person and say, I know what you did, and now everybody else does too. And seeing them come to terms with that is something I think would give me more closure than anything.
If you have any information about what happened to Brenda Martinez, call the Richfield Township Police Department in Genesee County. For 9 and 10 News, I'm David Leiden.
So she worked that night, and then she went downstairs and listened to Paulie finish out his set. And once they wrapped up, she got on her bike to head home.
It's just before 2 a.m. on July 5th, 2013, as Kelly Boyce Hurlburt begins her bike ride home after spending the night working at North Peak Brewing Company.
Especially that time of year, would take their bikes to and from work all the time just to not have to deal with the car and the traffic, and she would ride into town constantly instead of driving.
But as she neared the end of her journey home along Washington Street, Kelly was hit.
I woke up to a phone call saying we needed to get up to Travers. It was bad. We needed to get to the hospital as soon as possible.
Kelly was dragged for more than a block, somehow entangled in the vehicle that hit her.
They did everything they could and took her in, and there was just nothing they could do.
Now police need your help finding the driver who hit and killed a Traverse City woman. Kelly Boyce was riding home on her bike, doing everything right. She was along the curb, riding with the...
At first, it was a big shock, to understand it, and When we first started getting the initial, the first couple days, we thought it was, was it a horrific accident? What happened? And trying to understand it.
Police were trying to do the same as horrific witness descriptions of what happened emerged.
We heard a crash or some kind of tire sound from a car and then screaming. And my husband went downstairs and he could see a truck of some sort turning the corner.
Investigators believe Kelly was hit from behind by a darker colored SUV or pickup. Captain Keith Gillis now heads up the investigation.
This was a horrific, just unbelievable that the individual that was driving this vehicle did not hear her when there were people, a witness a block and a half away that could hear her screaming. And what type of person would do that?
Detectives have reviewed thousands of tips and potential leads in the case over the past decade. Kelly's family has also considered the possibility what happened to her may not have been an accident.
Maybe they didn't know that they had done it. And even in the first few months, maybe somebody would come forward and say, we didn't realize, maybe after, the first few weeks, maybe they just didn't realize what they left the scene, but they're going to turn themselves in. They're going to come back and say, we did this, but we need to make it right. But there was all that hope in the beginning, and as time has went on, I personally don't feel that's the case now, especially after all these years. I think it was intentional.
In late June of this year, Kelly's family and Traverse City Police once again held a news conference, hoping to bring in more tips, possibly the one that could help solve the case after a decade of hoping and waiting.
Some of the tips have led us to tips that we've already worked on, but there are a few that are new information, and like I said, it's time for some closure for the family and some justice, and also some closure for the officers that were involved that night, and for the detectives that have been working on this case for the last 10 years.
Her life was cut short. She was just innocently riding home from work one night. And is there others that this has happened to? It's not fair. She was taken way too soon from us. She's missed all these years that were taken from her and taken from us. And whoever did this shouldn't be able to walk around and not have to pay for what they did and what they took from us.
If you have any information on who hit and killed Kelly Boyce Hurlburt, contact the Traverse City Police Department. The FBI is also offering a $25,000 reward for information that leads to an arrest and conviction. For 9 and 10 News, I'm David Leiden.
These students are going through literally page by page, several thousand pages of a police file.
Solving a cold case, it's no easy task, even for the most seasoned detective. But sometimes the more eyes there are on a case, the more ideas, theories, and clues that pop up. And at Western Michigan University, students are serving as that extra set of eyes.
I've always been interested in cold cases for as long as I can remember. I kind of grew up watching true crime shows, reading books about unsolved cases.
I've always been really into the serial killers, things like that, following news stories, reading up on historical ones. It's always been something that kind of fascinated me.
I always knew I was interested in this, specifically forensics, and I've always watched different documentaries, movies.
These students aren't doing suspect interrogations, but they are helping state police with what can be one of the most time-consuming parts of a cold case.
So at first we started scanning documents from cold cases that detectives have given us to do. Then we make that into a collapsed PDF file for detectives to look through on their phone to make it easier for them to go through big binders full of just paperwork of all these cases.
Along with that, we just do a lot of teamwork regarding talking about the things we're reading. Any kind of maps we can draw out, family trees, anything where we can take a section of the case and kind of work on that and expand on that.
Condensing all that material down from boxes and boxes of files to a searchable PDF saves detectives countless time and energy when chasing down potential new leads. And sometimes those leads or ideas on where to turn next come straight from the students.
I would probably say there's so much more that goes into it than I thought, and it's a lot more emotional than I would have expected. You have to be very strong in the sense of your emotions and not let your emotions get the best of you.
All that meticulous work quickly paid off when state police announced the arrest of a man tied to a West Michigan cold case in 2022.
Your program's been up and running roughly 2 years, and you've already helped with one
I know, it makes
conviction.
it
That's
sound,
got to be a really good feeling.
I know, it makes it sound really good, doesn't it? I love this. We have 100% success. I keep telling everybody that real quick.
I think for me, the kind of biggest moment was attending Patrick Gillum's sentencing. I was involved with the Roxanne Wood case, and getting to go down there and see that moment of justice and closure and get to meet her family really just drove home how big and important the work we're doing here is.
All that in-classroom experience is translating to invaluable real-world experience.
I feel like for me, it's definitely getting like hands-on. I've always wanted a hands-on experience, and definitely getting to know like the detectives and everyone that's like a part of this as well.
Even if we don't go anywhere, it's still making a difference.
Yeah.
And I think it feels really good when you do get a little step in the right direction. I think whether or not we go anywhere, I think I'm satisfied with what we've done so far.
These students really are the leaders of tomorrow. They're the most educated people that we have in American society. And so regardless of what they decide to do, how cool is that? That they have seen in detail what a police file looks like. They have seen in detail what good policing looks like. I think that's really important considering many of the controversies that are going on in American society today.
In Kalamazoo, David Leiden, 9 and 10 News.
There wasn't any good place to look, and nothing has come up.
The woods of northern Michigan can hold a lot of mysteries, and former Grand Traverse County Sheriff's Deputy John Block believes they've been holding one he's been trying to solve since July 4th of 1977.
It was a fairly uneventful day, and in the area that I was already on the Sheriff's Department, that area and further east to Mile Luzerne, the weather was good. But there was a big storm front coming through from west-east across Lake Michigan.
John's parents, John and Jean, set out that afternoon from Macomb Airport in New Haven. They took off in this Cessna bound for the Lost Creek Sky Ranch near Luzerne in Oscoda County, roughly a 2-hour flight.
They didn't show up, and it was dark, and he was not allowed to fly at nighttime. He was working on that, because he's getting ready to retire. But so my brother called me from Luzerne, Mile, and said, hey, did Mom and Dad show up in Traverse City?
But John and Jean weren't in Traverse City either. In fact, they weren't anywhere to be found. John didn't file a flight plan, was not instrument rated, and usually flew by following major highways, avoiding flying over major bodies of water. Extensive searches in the days and weeks following the Block's disappearance turned up nothing, and searches in the years since have led to the same frustrating result.
We've had maybe a half a dozen or more sightings that people called in from all over the state of Michigan. And the last one we got was in the Osable River this fall, and the guy said he saw an airplane wing upside down in front of his cottage. So we haven't been able to find that, but there was a lot of tips, but nothing ever paid off.
Local author and shipwreck hunter Ross Richardson has written about the Block's disappearance and helped with some of the more recent searches.
By the way, guys, keep your eyes up in this, look at trees every once in a while. And if you see any metal on the ground, we gotta look at it and figure out what it is.
The strongest theory remains that the Blocks and their plane are somewhere in the dense woods of the Huron-Manistee National Forest.
My personal opinion is the airport is the epicenter, and as you go out from there, it's more unlikely to be the further away you get from the airport. That area has a lot of huge swamps, and really until I got in that area and understood it, it's not going to be in the woods where people have gone through. This is, again, my opinion. It's going to be in a marsh or a swamp or somewhere that nobody has gone through.
John has tried for years to figure out what happened to his parents in 1977, speaking with 9 and 10 News in 1985.
If the plane is found, then my parents' remains will be found, and that we can have a proper burial and services for him.
And again in 2002. John also released this video nearly a year ago, asking hunters to be on the lookout as they headed into the woods.
Please help me find my parents and bring them home.
The man who spent years helping others figure out what happened to their loved ones, trying to solve one final mystery.
There might be now a hunter or fisherman, or somebody just bought property or just started cutting trees down, and have them pay attention if they see what they think is just a pile of junk, you know. No, just keep looking.
If you have any information about what happened to John and Jean Block, contact the Grand Traverse County Sheriff's Office. For 9 and 10 News, I'm David Leiden.
A lot of woods, a lot of large tracts of woods and forest in that area that would be very easy to hide a crime if someone chose to.
The woods of Trout Lake in western Chippewa County are a sportsman's paradise. And on November 11th, 1966, a group of hunters were preparing for what they hoped would be another successful season when they made a grisly discovery.
Found human remains that had clearly been drugged and hidden underneath the tree. The troopers originally arrived on scene and found what they believed to be a white male that has deceased from a number of apparent gunshots. The remains were fairly decomposed.
Investigators would eventually determine the man was shot at least 5 times with a .22 caliber firearm.
An autopsy was conducted, and it was clear that multiple gunshots were the cause of death. They did dental work for the individual. Back in 1966, there was no DNA, so it's not like it is today. So their first attempts in any homicide case is to try to identify the victim.
But that is where detectives would get stuck.
Numerous attempts through years of work were unsuccessful and able to identify this John Doe victim of homicide. Eventually, the case went cold. A number of tips were called in and run down that did not reveal the identity of John Doe, and eventually the case went cold.
This is the sketch state police developed of the man, possibly in his mid-20s, who stood between 5'8" and 5'9" and had a medium build with brown hair with a slight reddish tint. Some items found at the scene did offer some clues about where this man may have been from.
In his pockets was a number of coins, both some American and some Canadian coins that were found upon his person. Also a set of keys with a leather keychain hasp were found in his pocket. His clothing led investigators to believe at the time that possibly he may have come from an area of farm country, kind of like a Western style of clothing that was found upon his person. There's information that back in those times there were kind of groups of individuals that worked for logging companies that would kind of travel around the Upper Peninsula. There were logging companies that were working in that area at that time that had workers from out of the area. So it was one of the working theories that it was an individual from a logging company that had passed through that area doing work that may have been killed and left behind.
The case would also suffer a major setback.
We were advised that the cemetery that he was buried in 1967, downstate, had a flood inside their records department and destroyed the section of records where his burial was recorded. So we have identified the cemetery that he's buried in downstate, but are unable to determine exactly which plot he's in to do an exhumation to then begin our DNA work.
Still, state police believe the case can be solved.
We do have dental records. We did do dental examinations and have those records. So if a person who's named to us has information from a dental office, we would be able to match up those dental records. There's hope. There's hope that some family member is going to be on NamUs's website or hear the story about this case and understand or realize that they had a missing uncle, they had a missing brother, they had a missing whoever that this person could possibly be.
If you have any information on who this John Doe is, contact Michigan State Police. For 9 and 10 News, I'm David Leiden.